How's everyone doing this morning? Can you hear me all right? All right. I actually like when it's early in the morning because I can really see who the supporters are, right? I want to get to my slides, but I see over here on the, what starts now, you can go ahead and move me over to the slide deck. Okay. First and foremost, when it moves forward, there we go. Here are my conflicts. And here's a slide that keeps getting updated here and there. I don't want to spend too much time on it. By now, you guys know me. I'm an engineer. I founded the Citizen Science Foundation. I began this journey in 2015 when I saw my own cholesterols rise substantially going on a ketogenic diet. Started blogging on it on the cholesterolcode.com, which eventually ended up becoming a documentary. More on that in a bit. But basically, what we're all here for is the study, Keto-CTA. And this is just going to be a very fast overview. But what we did is we took 100 individuals showing increased cholesterol levels after adopting keto, the phrase that I termed myself in 2017 called lean mass hyperresponder. They were near these cut points. It was an LDL cholesterol of 190 or higher, HDL of 60 or higher, and triglycerides of 80 and below. And they were followed for 1 year using CT angiography. So one baseline scan at day 0, another scan roughly 365 days later for each participant. All 200 of those scans were completed in February of 2024. Now, before we go any further, I want everyone to keep this at the center of your mind at all times. The scans are the scans are the scans. The CT scans themselves are the ultimate source of the data. Now, how do we get data from these scans? Well, there's two general methods that are the most used. One is known as a semi-quantitative analysis that makes use of expert blinded readers, like, say, Dr. Budoff, who use software for which they go through and have a scoring system, and that gives us a semi-quantitative data set. The second major category is known as quantitative analysis, and this makes use of computer automation. So things like AI and algorithms help create a quantitative data set. And so now I want to take you through the timeline with these two types in mind. And I'm going to keep these CT scans in a batch at the top. So again, you keep in mind at all times that they're all looking at the same 200 scans. So in early 2024 is when the semi-quantitative analysis was completed for these 200 scans. And that's what we built the documentary around. This is me interviewing Dr. Budoff. It's in one of the scenes that's actually in the documentary itself. And naturally, we were pretty confident that, like other imaging studies, we were going to see a lot of collaboration, or rather a correlation, between the semi-quantitative and the quantitative. Well, the first quantitative that was available was late 2024, and this was the Cleerly analysis. That's when it was completed. But to be fair, while there was a lot that they had in common, when it came in, I did have some concerns, is that there was some divergence between the semi-quantitative and this Cleerly analysis in several ways. That said, there were two important ways in which they were very much alike. They agreed. One of those is that the baseline plaque was very predictive of future plaque progression. The more plaque you had at baseline, the more likely you were to see a greater increase, and the degree of the increase was very relevant. But on top of that, there was no association between either LDL cholesterol or ApoB in either of these two data sets. So, that said, I still pressed a bit on the issues that didn't make sense to me around the Cleerly data set. But the team pushed back and made some good points, such as the fact that these two major findings are valid and worth publication either way. Adrian Sotomoto will be up not too long after this, and will make the same point. You still publish the data that you have, regardless of where you're at with it. Bottom line is, we still had these two things that they shared in common, which is why it ended up being in the title of the paper. But importantly, I'm the funder. And as the funder, it's inappropriate for me to press these questions too far. So there's a degree with which I can ask, but I can't go back to the team and say, keep reworking this data until it makes sense to me, the engineer, who's not the imaging expert, who's not the statistician, and so forth. I would be just as critical of a funder who was pressing a team for something that might not look as attractive to them, which is what I knew I'd be criticized for, because I would criticize somebody for it. Regardless, though, I knew I would eventually get the raw data in hand at the completion of the paper, and so I could look a little bit closer into it myself. Finally, April 7th comes around, and we publish this paper on these two analyses. Now, critics were in high gear and offered some critiques on the presentation and the social media rollout. And for what it's worth, I could agree with a lot of these critiques. I chat about it at length in a couple interviews. In fact, one of those interviews is with Chris McCaskill, which I recommend you see. It's up on my YouTube channel. But while we're waiting, it's important to reassert that, importantly, these two analyses are what the April 7th paper is based on, but neither are the pre-specified methodology. Meta's QAngio, which was coming later, is the pre-specified methodology to match with the pre-specified endpoint. So QAngio, the problem with it is it's going to take the longest. It takes 2 to 3 hours per scan. It's quite labor intensive. Now, once more, these are 3 different analyses. Once all of these are together, they're looking at the same 200 scans, 100 participants, 1 at baseline and 1 at follow-up. But as this paper comes out, our study was getting a lot of attention. However, many prominent critics on social media seemed largely disengaged with several aspects of the study. For one, the plaque begetting plaque was largely considered irrelevant. The semi-quantitative data was just ignored entirely, even after we released it in its raw form. The clearly quantitative analysis was embraced, but was now being treated as though it was the pre-specified methodology, not QAngio. Regardless, as the team thought even before this would get published, the entire lack of association with either LDL or ApoB and plaque regression was unmistakable, which is why these data were at odds with the lipid hypothesis, at least for our cohort and at least at this point in time. But then came a new limited contrast argument, which emerged and many detractors quickly embraced across the spectrum. Basically, it's saying that everyone had high LDL, and therefore the association doesn't matter. So I want to take you through this. This is an example straight from Twitter. And they used this image. They said, I think this image helps to visualize why a lack of contrast in the exposure is most likely the reason why you, meaning us, failed to find a significant association. And honestly, I assumed anyone well-versed in lipid hypothesis and our data who had actually looked through the paper wouldn't be adopting this saturation position. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. A lot of these folks, including these 3 fine gentlemen who, by the way, I have a good relationship, a good rapport with all of them. I've chatted, I've had many good conversations both publicly and privately with all 3. But all 3 of them adopted the position. In fact, I want to carry some of the quotes from these same videos. This is Lane Norton. He says, if you're going to do an association study, a proper association study, you need a proper dosage, meaning you need a varying dosage. All of these people had high LDL and high ApoB. Additionally, this is from Simon Hill. He asks, was there enough variability in ApoB exposure to detect a dose-response relationship? And he later says, so they compared people with high ApoB to other people with high ApoB. And Gill says the study does not look at going from normal cholesterol to high. Once again, kind of illustrating the range. Everybody had high cholesterol to begin with. That's the inclusion criteria. So this is a conceptual graph that I'm throwing in front of you right now. And you can see kind of what comes to mind. When you hear everybody had high LDL and ApoB, you're probably thinking something like this, right? Let me see if I can get this laser working. There we go. All right. You're probably thinking, because here's the LDL cholesterol going from one end to the other, and here's the mean, right? 253. And this would be like a standard deviation of 10. Standard deviation of 10. So it's just like this range of between 226 milligrams per deciliter and 271. So when you're thinking of it this way, then actually, I would agree. I would agree. If it was actually this narrow range, it would make a lot of sense. And that's what comes to mind when you're hearing they all had high LDL. Okay, but our spread was already in table 1 of our paper. Let me take you to table 1 of our paper. This is it. This is the LDL cholesterol. Now, I know a lot of people are not necessarily going to be stats whizzes in here, but for those who are, I'm looking at you, Finney, back there. I know that you're familiar with what standard deviation is. We have a standard deviation of 84 milligrams per deciliter. We have an interquartile range of 202 to 308 milligrams per deciliter. That means 50% are between that, 25% or all the way on the other side, 25% on the other side of that. So what does that mean? Well, that means when you really look at the spread, I'm going to show you all of the first LDL cholesterol taken from our participant population now in the same graph. You ready? It looks like this. Now, I have lines up here for what the optimal amount is. That's green for 100 milligrams per deciliter. You see that the average, we have 130. And sorry, it's not very, I got this in the previous, people were telling me the yellow doesn't show up very well, but that's heterozygous FH. And that is, by the way, our eligibility. So you might be surprised to find that we did have 17 participants that once they got their blood work up, when coming to the facility, 17 were actually below our eligibility. But again, the eligibility is what gets you in the door. It doesn't mean that that's what it is at the intake. So some people may have been eligible 5 months before they then came and got their first scan, but many of them were going by, of course, the first blood work that was taken. Regardless, that's a feature, not a bug. We have a wider spectrum of possible LDL. But look over here across the red side on the homozygous FH. We have 6 participants that have an LDL cholesterol of 400 or higher. Homozygous FH, as Brown and Goldstein's work will tell you, is a 1 in a million possibility. 1 in a million. So we don't just have spread. I'm going to make a very audacious statement here. Are you guys ready for this? Here we go. I'm going to say that I'm confident we have the largest spread of LDL cholesterol of any prospective imaging study ever conducted. Now, you guys all have phones. If anybody is interested, I want you to go ahead and look up right now on Google or ChatGPT. I want you to find any prospective imaging study that has a spread of 542 milligrams per deciliter, going from 49 at the lowest to 591 at the highest. It is not a limited spread at all. It's not a limited contrast at all. Of course, we have a varying dose. It's gigantic. Now, I need to bring this back to the lipid hypothesis itself. Even if you don't recognize the title of this paper, you no doubt have seen this graph. This is considered the Bible of modern-day lipidology. This is the 2017 European Atherosclerosis Society's consensus statement on LDL. And I'm just going to quote a number of the quotes from this paper. The probability of intimal retention of LDL leading to an initiation and progression of development of atherosclerotic plaque increases in a dose-dependent manner. Here's another one where it's talking about heterozygous FH and homozygous FH, that it's proportional to both the absolute magnitude and duration of exposure to elevated LDL cholesterol. And you can read the other quotes. I'm just going to break it down. I'm just going to put it plainly. The dose-dependent log linear relationship between LDL, ApoB, and atherosclerosis is not a movable goalpost. It is the lipid hypothesis. Another frequent claim is that these are the healthiest people we can find. And make no mistake, I do think our participants are healthier than average. But it's worth making sure everybody understands. To be sure, a number of the participants have publicly shared adopting keto to deal with various health issues like diabetes, obesity, hypertension, etc. before entering the study. Our Lean Mass Hyperresponder Facebook group is full of people who've gone on this journey, right? Not everybody started as an athlete, decided to go on keto, and just really likes eating only meat. And they were all happening to be the participants of our study, right? This was shared with permission. This is from Susan Bruni, who was a COSI citizen science speaker. And she talks about her journey of fighting obesity and how ultimately she found keto and became not only a lean mass hyperresponder, but a participant in our study. Now, naturally, for somebody who's been on her life journey, we would want to caution that she may have more health risks to be moderate about, to be considerate of. Some had existing high coronary artery calcification, just no diagnosis for cardiovascular disease. For example, this is a Facebook post. I blurred out all of the details, but this is from 1 year before the study began, where a future participant shared they had a CAC in the mid-300s. I know a constant rumor that keeps getting floated around was that we didn't let anybody in who reported having a high CAC. We absolutely have participants who've reported having a high CAC coming into our study. Again, we wanted to get within a certain spectrum of those that would likely be healthy, but not the healthiest that we could find. There wasn't that degree of thumbs on scales, just to put it plainly. And don't forget, our eligibility criteria is more permissive than many realize. Just as I mentioned, some folks, even with the last blood work that they gave us, may have creeped in the direction opposite what we imagined. But in many cases, we, for example, had an A1C that didn't go to 5.7. It went to under 6. Therefore, people could be up to 5.9. Well, we had 14 participants who had a hemoglobin of A1C of 5.7 to 6.1, and 12 who had glucose, fasting glucose of 100 to 116, and 15 with an hs-CRP of 1.05 to 1.8. These aren't numbers they supplied us. They were taken there at Lundquist, right? So why wasn't I more actively debating this online? Why wasn't I discussing this? Why were my appearances winding down on podcasts while likewise disappearing on social media? The answer lies in what was happening behind the scenes, and I'm now going to finally share it. I want to talk about challenges with the Cleerly analysis. So, taking you back to the timeline, on April 18th, 11 days after we got the April 7th paper, Lundquist delivered the raw anonymized data to the Citizen Science Foundation. This is the thing I talked about earlier in the talk, that I would get the raw anonymized data, and then I could look a little bit closer myself. And as I feared, there were several issues I found concerning with the Cleerly dataset. I brought this to the attention of Lundquist and Cleerly right away. And then, in a Zoom meeting in the next week with the core team on April 24th, I presented these issues to the CMO of Cleerly at the time, who was also a co-author on our paper. He agreed on the importance of having their platform run a blinded quality control pass to confirm or disconfirm these results. However, what followed did surprise us. The previous commitment was disregarded and Cleerly asserted they would not follow through on the blinded quality control pass. It was at that point that we knew we needed to engage another third-party service that also offered AI-guided quantitative analysis for CTA scans. Enter HeartFlow. This is why no one had heard about HeartFlow until we quite literally were having the data captured. And then Dr. Budoff did one talk, which I posted, but that's all that was posted on it. Now, the HeartFlow platform, as one of the founders would point out, I have to concede, I didn't know it very well. He said, actually, they have a much larger footprint than Cleerly. It's just that Cleerly gets a lot more press. They have over 600 peer-reviewed publications behind them. They have over 400,000 patients served. And I liked it because they were willing to work with us on making sure that the scans that they got were fully blinded, so that we got a fully blinded analysis. So we got to add a fourth analysis. Now, this is why I was engaging less and less on the study until all the data were in, until all 4 analyses were completed. Under normal circumstances, where 2 analyses disagreed with each other, especially when they're not the pre-specified methodology, it would be welcome to add a third to break the tie, but these aren't normal circumstances. We knew detractors of our research were quite attached to the Cleerly analysis, and we wanted to have an additional blinded, independent analysis of these same 200 scans to include. Now, I want to pull this graph up for you, because now it's like another lens, right? Hopefully by this point, there's no way you're going to mistake the fact that all of these analyses are looking at the same scans. And now we have 4 total. And I just want to take a moment to really emphasize an important point. we're not just talking about analyses as though you can just run them on a computer. We're talking actually about multiple teams. And I'm not kidding when I say this, hundreds of thousands of dollars in detection. So this is, and Adrian will get to go into this a bit more, this is in fact very record-breaking levels of multiple independent analyses for an imaging study. You guys ready to see some of the data? Are you sure? Okay. Well, listen, the first thing I want to do is I want to jump straight into the pre-specified endpoint, which is the percent change in non-calcified plaque volume. And before I do, I gotta give that warning. This is preliminary, of course, and therefore treat it as preliminary. Understand it hasn't undergone peer review or final publication, so it should not be considered as conclusive or fully validated. All right, this is the non-calcified plaque volume percentage change, and it's the mean percent change. Now, spoiler alert. Halfway into this study, I realized why this wasn't good, and that's because halfway into the study is when Adrian Sotomoda came on board and explained the problem with having a pooled mean percent change, a relative change. And that is part of why you might be wondering how all three of these can be so different from each other. You see, Cleerly is what it was from before, it's 80.6% mean average increase, whereas HeartFlow is an increase of 6.3%, whereas QAngio is plus 39.8%. But if there's anything I hope we've been learning, especially in nutrition, there's a problem with looking at only relative, right? Are we interested in absolute change? Of course, we're interested in absolute change. So put a pin in this until you see Adrian Sotomoda's talk, which will be a little bit later in this conference. What is the absolute change comparison? The actual quantifiable plaque, the median absolute change in non-calcified plaque volume. You already know this number. You've been paying attention to the April 7th paper. It's 18.8. But what happened with HeartFlow and QAngio? Well, they're about less than a third each. It's at 5.5 millimeters cubed, and with QAngio, it's 5.6 millimeters cubed. They're both low, and they're in close agreement with each other. What about total plaque volume? This includes not just the non-calcified plaque, but the calcified plaque as well. Once again, they are both low, and they are in close agreement with each other. Now, percent atheroma volume is something that I'm somewhat new to, but it's where the industry had been going as it was letting go of a lot of things that were in the quantitative side. This was also something that was focused on quite a bit, appropriately, I think, because it was something we reported on. And they clearly had us at a 0.8 cohort-wide, but for both HeartFlow and QAngio, it's actually quite low, and once again, it was in close agreement. Now, at the time that the April 7th paper came out, there was a lot of attention on our supplemental table 1. And for what it's worth, the HeartFlow at PAV of 0.3, QAngio of 0.2 are at or lower than all of our reference studies from the original supplemental table 1 of the April 7th paper. And if I could just have a moment of intellectual honesty that I would like to push out for everybody, both on the supporter and the detractor side and so forth. No question, these numbers look good when we have a horseshoes and hand grenades comparison with these other studies. So you might think this would be a cause to do a bunch of victory laps, but I would actually caution against that. Because just like when it might not have looked as good when looking only at the Cleerly analysis, and now that we have multiple independent analyses that are agreeing with each other and not with Cleerly, that show that it's low, when doing comparison with other studies that have different populations, different circumstances, it's not a true control. I would caution against us doing it just as much as I would caution against detractors doing it. So while I will show this comparison to update the record, I do want to say appropriately we should want controls, whether they're attached to controls or matched controls. So 2 important observations. Again, these are just the top lines. But first, the relative change in non-calcified plaque volume is very different between all 3 of these quantitative analyses. But in absolute terms, the absolute change in plaque is in general agreement between HeartFlow and QAngio analyses, but not Cleerly. Now I want to talk about what to me is the star of the show. It's plaque regression. These are the waterfall graphs for both HeartFlow and QAngio and total plaque volume. So this is both non-calcified plaque and calcified plaque. You can see that on the left side, we have regression on both ends. But to be sure, I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about that in a moment. At the same time, it's worth noting and should be called out that we also have some that are progressors on the right side. So, just as I would expect with any population that's middle age, generally pretty healthy, we have a mix. But we do have regression that was already showing up at these levels. Now, these were all just graphs to me initially, right? And this includes non-calcified plaque volume, which also has just about as many regressors. It has 33 regressors for HeartFlow and 15 for QAngio. But once again, these were all just graphs. They were graphs until last month when it became a lot more real to me. And that's when I got to be there, when Dr. Budoff, for the first time, after getting the HeartFlow data in, isolated a number of the individuals for HeartFlow, and this one in particular, and took a close look and confirmed that there in fact was plaque regression. Seeing these side by side, it was a big moment for me. I think this was a point where it became quite visceral. Now, going back to when I had this graph, this is one of the things that popped out. I'm not going to take the whole talk to discuss the problems I saw with the Cleerly data, but I do want to tell you one of the first moments where when I had the raw data, I was starting to question things. And that was this graph. It was baseline CAC, right, against total plaque volume change. So the change in total plaque volume, what stood out to me while I was just sitting on this for months was how on the left side, the CAC of 0, everybody had only a positive increase in plaque. That was it. There was only positive, there was no negative. There was not one negative total plaque volume participant in the entire data set. But this especially stood out when you're looking all the way over here to the left. This is the 0 line. There's not one dot that's below the 0 line. Once we had HeartFlow and QAngio, then I saw more of what I was expecting, a wobble. We see it going up, we see it going also down. Now, does that give me a lot of comfort that there's a whole lot of regression? Well, I already know in advance, a lot of these people have very low levels of plaque to begin with. Their baseline plaque is so low, and so a change that's also low is very difficult to see, right? So some of you may know where I'm going, which is that if you're identifying where these arrows land, and one of the bottom arrow is right there at the baseline, well, on this end, we see the wobble. On this end, we don't. And that should be a red flag for anyone familiar with statistics and measurement error. And I'm going to prove this to you. You don't even need to be a stats whiz, right? I'm going to demonstrate this with a bathroom scale. I have my handy assistant over here. This is a bathroom scale, right? Okay. I already looked, and I can tell you that it's about plus or minus a quarter of a pound, which is pretty accurate, right? Okay. But I do have something in my pocket that weighs something. So I'm going to put this down here. I'm going to step on it. And I'm not going to tell you the measurement. But I'm going to pick this up and step on it again, right? Now, I objectively weigh more. You agree, right? I weigh more. Okay. So I've showed you two phases. Let's say I repeat this 100 times, right? The same thing I just did. Would anybody like to take me up on a bet of $10,000 that the second scan will never be lower than the first? No, nobody's taking me up on that? You don't even need to be an advanced statistician. Oh, okay. You don't even need to be in advanced statistics. This is pretty serious because All you had to do was to know that the accuracy level of this is limited. It's below a noise floor. And at that point, you expect noise. And I'm telling you, you can believe in the lipid hypothesis. You could believe all of our participants had an increase in plaque. But as the plaque levels are so low that it's difficult to read, can you believe it would only show in one direction? That's difficult. And that's why it stood out to me. And that's why I was so happy to not just get one, but two quantitative analyses that would show indeed what I was expecting, that there would be a wobble at these levels. It was already so implausible for me to believe that not one single participant would have their plaque at least show up at a lower level out of standard error. So here are my final thoughts on Cleerly. And regression takes us the full loop. Because while there are a lot of issues that I was showing them back in that meeting I was discussing on the 24th, I wanted to find one thing that even a lay audience can understand. And that's in the topic of regression. So let me just lay this down. This can boil down to one straightforward qualifier. Every imaging study, fact check me on this one as well. Every imaging study I've reviewed that reports total plaque volume has shown some degree of regression, even in placebo groups. Again, it may not even be true regression. It might just be part of standard error. In our 3 independent CT analyses outside of Cleerly, within our study, all using the exact same scans from the Keto-CTA study, we consistently observed regression in a subset of patients. Dr. Budoff's team and Dr. Budoff himself have independently verified regression in a subset of these patients. So, put simply, accepting the Cleerly analysis as definitive means accepting a result showing 0 instances of regression across the entire dataset. An outcome not only at odds with every independent analysis of these same scans, but also statistically improbable and unprecedented in any sizable imaging study. I am hopeful Cleerly will complete a blinded quality control review to confirm or disconfirm the anomalies in their data set as I presented to you here today. So, conclusion. Do we have clear evidence of plaque regression in our data? Yes, we do. Not only do we have agreement on these across, not only do we have agreement on this across semi-quantitative HeartFlow and hs-CRP QAngio analysis, but we also have direct verification by the expert readers of Lundquist and Dr. Budoff himself. Multiple individuals exhibiting LDL cholesterol levels comparable to familial hypercholesterolemia achieved verified regression in total plaque volume through serial CT angiography. And let me restate this again, by the way. On average, there was an increase in plaque, cohort-wide. There was an increase in plaque, which we would expect with any middle-aged population. So, while I'm definitely highlighting the regression, I do want to make sure it comes in a balanced message. Does this regression that I've showed you, does it mean that being a lean mass hyperresponder guarantees you are at a low risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease? Do me a favor and prove our critics wrong by giving the appropriate answer to this. What's the correct answer? No. Correct. It's no. The answer is no. Listen, just like vegans or athletes or those with naturally low LDL cholesterol, a subset exists with higher progression of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and we don't have all the answers as to why. This exists in our cohort as well. We've seen it. Okay, so do these data show any association of LDL or ApoB with either the presentation or progression of plaque? What's your answer? No. No. If you are a stats whiz, please look at this R squared, right? Versus ApoB versus LDL cholesterol. It's so low. And again, I want to be a good scientist. I want to say it's possible that once we do a third set of scans at a later point in time, that some association appears. But do we have it now? We don't. We don't have it. We're not even close to having it. Across every analysis on this cohort, there is no association of LDL or ApoB with the presentation or progression of plaque, full stop. What's next? Okay, well, the study extension, which I just mentioned, and the details for the Keto-CTA, they're nearly complete. We needed to get past this hump. If you are a previous participant of Keto-CTA, you will be contacted soon by a study coordinator on this extension. I can't say how soon. We have to get all the details worked out. The Triad study funding is nearly complete. I got permission to hint at this, that we have one final COSI conference to hopefully close the gap on this very ambitious research effort. More details will be shared on that soon. If you guys don't mind, if I just take a second before I complete this talk. This actually is an important milestone I've honestly been waiting for since I was on a Houston stage in October of 2019, announcing this as an idea, right? So it's been almost 6 years. And while we have all of this ahead, this is kind of where we turn in the final, right? We have one paper left that's going to tie all of this together for the current scope, but this is that scope that was pitched on that Houston stage. So I really want to thank all of you for all of your support for making this happen. It's just been tremendous. Okay. Very special thanks to all contributors to the Citizen Science Foundation, all of my amazing co-authors for previous and coming papers, and to my collaborators, my very special collaborators, Nick Norwitz. Nick, you're killing it out there. Adrian, can't wait to see your talk. I love you all. Thank you so much for all your support in making this happen.